I have a complicated relationship with the Purge franchise overall. In some ways, I think it's ingenious. I think that it spouts out so much potential and it's such a brilliant idea, both commentary wise as well as basic fictional entertainment, and I think that it does a lot of things right when it comes to its lore and contributions to the horror genre. I also think, however, that it also varies heavily in quality. God damn it, do some of the Purge titles just suck, and it's disappointing because, again, I feel like there's so much potential there. Today I just want to run through just kind of an analysis of the franchise of the Purge overall, and I'd also like to talk a little bit about masks, something vital to the narrative of this world and something that I'm quite a fan of. However, something that I feel like the films and shows themselves don't often focus very heavily on. And that's the thing. Sometimes I think that the franchise knows exactly what it's doing with its initial concept, and then other times it leaves me sitting there like, what the fuck are we doing here? The genre that it falls under then becomes its biggest asset and its own worst liability simultaneously. And it's frustrating. So first things first, I think that I should probably run down what I think of each piece of the series overall. The first Purge being the original Purge, not the first Purge, which is actually the fourth Purge. The first Purge that was actually made, I think, is a fairly underrated film. With a super low rating of 5.7 on IMDb and some arguably harsh criticism, I think that the original Purge film set up its premise quite nicely and made for a fun indie thriller/horror. It had a great concept and talked just enough about the world that it's set in and its rules to intrigue, but not too much as to be too over the top and unbelievable. I look at the original Purge movie like I do the original John Wick, in which it was the most simple, sure, but it also mentions potential sequel material just enough, but not too much to not warrant being a good film without it. The original Purge would have worked as a standalone film, and I like that. But having also said that, I think that it is a huge waste of potential. While spouting out its creative ideas and the general concept of the Purge itself and what that represents and what it entails, the film also goes out of its way to kind of avoid showing it. In the end, all we're left with is a simplistic home invasion movie that doesn't take advantage of its difference from every other film of the sort. We don't really explore outside of the main home very much. We don't really see how anybody else reacts to the situation other than through exposition. It's a weirdly claustrophobic film that keeps us contained rather than letting us loose, which is exactly the kind of motion that would suit its content, and it's just kind of a waste. That is, if this was the only time that we ever saw the Purge be depicted in any sort of media and there weren't sequels. Having seen sequels, the saving grace of the franchise, especially in its follow-up being The Purge Anarchy, we can see that the original film wasn't trying too hard to be too ambitious and show an entire world of devastation. More so, it wanted to humanize the horror of the potential. What could possibly be happening out there? That's what the movie kind of makes you ask yourself. Though we don't see a ton of it, it's left lingering and haunting with us for the duration of the film. And though the main characters are wealthy and thus relatively safe until the events of the film take place, it's a nice starting off point to introduce us to the world. What comes is a film that explores the idea of privilege, racism, crime rates, and violence wrapped up in a pseudo-political horror. In short, I think that the original Purge film is great, if I'm being honest. Then comes The Purge Anarchy, which is really what gave the franchise its identity. You know, from here on out, everything kind of took place and copied that one. Here, for the first time, we truly saw the repercussions of such a ridiculous quote-unquote holiday, as they call it, throughout the series. For the first time in the series, the audience is shown what it's like for the middle class and below, and why that aspect of things makes a difference. It fleshes out the politics that much more and explores the idea of just how fucked people are in poverty when it comes to the Purge. It also shows us a much higher level of the grotesque and psychopathic acts that occur on this fictional night. As the film leans a little more into the action genre, we also get to see a lot more guns and artillery of that sort. We see a lot more makeshift weapons and chaos. We see the over-the-top costumes that people wear to intimidate their victims and have fun with while they're doing it. And we're introduced to the franchise's most badass character, played by Frank Grillo. It's awesome! The Purge Anarchy is cool. Then comes the next one, Election Year, which is kind of an interesting movie, I guess. It's got an interesting enough premise, and I think it's fine, but it ends up just feeling like more of the same thing. This one doesn't have too much of its own identity and doesn't build that much off of its predecessor. It's just the same shit, and I'm not that big of a fan or hater in the slightest. I think it's alright. Speaking of hating though, speaking of shit, my god, The First Purge, being the fourth Purge that was made about the first Purge. It's a very confusing title. Anyway, but the movie is absolute dog shit. Like, I can't even. I hate it so much to its very core. You don't even understand. The first Purge is so stupid that I just couldn't even get through it. The characters are mostly nonsensical caricatures of good guys and bad guys as the film tries to explore racism stronger than ever and fails in just about every way. The first Purge is offensive, if you ask me, to everybody, and it doesn't even know what it wants to do with itself. Does it want to portray criminals as desperate schmucks who have no other choice, or does it want them to be badass and cool motherfuckers who are just always the best no matter what? Does it want to be realistic and gritty, or does it want to have an attitude and be fun? Does it want us to sympathize with its characters, or does it want to make them all fucking idiots? I'll answer that with none of the above and also all of the above and a mix of both and also a whole bunch of other nonsense. The first Purge is one of the dumbest fucking movies I've ever seen in my life, and it makes me so mad. So now that you know how I feel about each film, let's get to the point. Also the show is pretty good. I like both seasons. So let's get to the meat of the subject. The Purge franchise wants to tell its own narrative with its own unique perspective. It's trying to say something through its fictional political issues. The Purge wants to speak up, clearly. It wants us to talk about America. It wants us to talk about wealth and privilege. It wants us to talk about race. And I get that. I think it sometimes does a good job too. But while being this socio-political mismatch of fun horror on top, it also wants to depict the world with real fear and dread. What if this is where the world is truly headed? In some ways, it rings true. We can see how the world got to this stage canonically. And if we ignore the insanity behind the logistics of the situation of the Purge and the crazy amount of paperwork that must be done all throughout the year on behalf of insurance companies and hospitals and this and that, so on and so on, if we ignore that stuff that just makes the world not make too much sense, I think that it's still a fairly effective and believable world in an over-the-top way. The motivations behind the characters that we spend time with is often simple and just either wanting to basically survive or to politically change things and rebel. Both are good human elements that I can get behind. What I have more of an issue with, but what I also find more interesting, are the villains. Often faceless, or with one representing character showing us the idea of who the franchise calls the new founding fathers, or the people who support them. And I get it, it's kind of a neat idea, but it also feels cartoonishly evil and ridiculous. This is why I think that the concept actually worked best in the original film, in which we aren't seeing all of the ongoings behind the scenes. You know, we aren't seeing all the political people discuss the rules behind everything. We're not seeing all of the kind of things that make the Purge believable or not believable. All that we're depicted with in this first Purge, the first Purge movie that was made, the original Purge, not the first Purge, the fourth Purge, but the first Purge, the original Purge, is just one specific grounded example of what the Purge itself leads to, which is normal people acting out and committing violent acts on other normal people, which is horrible, which is disturbing. But what I find most disturbing is the implication that they are just that, normal people. The most terrifying element to me when it comes to this sometimes silly franchise is the fact that it's just every purger that we see depicted wears a mask. And I think that it's a vastly looked over element upon the film. I think that it's often looked at upon by its viewers as just a horror trope. Like, yeah, they wear masks to be scary or something or whatever. And it's not really thought about much beyond that. But I've been thinking about the masks shown in each film quite a bit as I've been watching the TV series at the moment. The masks in the Purge franchise represent the idea of consideration. Despite it all, despite the horrendous acts made and the horrible violence depicted, the people doing these things are still planning for the future and are still thinking about themselves. Though the Purge franchise is usually set on Purge night, I think that what's most interesting and disturbing about the Purge is actually the entire rest of the year while that is not happening. Because it shows that the people that live in this world are capable of turning it off and on. They can go out for that one night where they're allowed to and are able to murder, and then when the day is over and they're not legally allowed to anymore, they can just turn that desire off and smile and switch right back to their daily roles. That is fucked. That is psychopathic shit. Though I don't really believe that if the Purge was a real thing that happened that people would really behave this way. Like, I believe that people are inherently violent if the situation calls for it, and I know that there are plenty of criminals in the world and they would take advantage of this and that crime and violence would happen, but I just have a hard time buying that it would happen to the level that's depicted. Like, I'm not a murderer only because it's illegal and I don't want to get into trouble. I fundamentally don't want to murder. That's just a normal human trait to have, regardless of whether I'm told I can or cannot. Murder's murder, you know, and I don't think that the Purge, if it just happened suddenly in real life, would turn everyone into crazy people, but Let's just roll with it for now. I think that masks are vital to the narrative of The Purge. They give the series an aesthetic identity. They have different and fun designs that make things a hell of a lot more creepy, but more deeply than anything, they tell us about the people behind them. As I said, they're still thinking about tomorrow. See, here's the thing. Masks hide anonymity, and on Purge Night, they give a license to literally kill. But not only to kill, not only to intimidate, not only to be creepy for the viewer. The masks give a license to avoid consequence in any way at all, not just legal. Purgers aren't afraid that they'll get in trouble. They're not afraid that they'll get arrested for doing wrong. No, it's so much more superficial than that. Purgers are afraid of being recognized. Purgers are afraid of judgment. If it weren't for the masks, the everyday psychopaths depicted in the films would be shamed the next day. Through masks, purgers are able to commit horrendous acts today and be able to live their normal and mundane lives tomorrow. Nobody the wiser. And that's the horror behind it. That behind our own masks, behind our own walls, we can be anybody. And more frighteningly, our neighbors can be anybody too. The horror of The Purge is that tomorrow everything will go back to normal. The horror of The Purge is tomorrow we have to live with what we've done. I think that's something really deep and meaningful that really leaves me with a sense of dread at the thought of the characters still caring about their reputations and still thinking for the future. Because it means that they're still themselves behind those masks. They're just people. So yeah, while The Purge is far from a perfect franchise, I think that it has genuine brilliance behind it. It just doesn't always reach its potential, particularly with the first Purge being the fourth Purge made. About the first Purge. I hate that movie so much. Okay, thank you for watching and all that stuff. Do the things like comment, share, subscribe and all that stuff, and look out for my next stuff. Thank you, bye.